Okay, everybody take your seat. We're ready to start. I'm taking over today for Mike, who can't make it today.
Oh, that mic.
Oh, he's here. We have more than one mic here. Yeah, there we do.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, Mike's here. Hi, Mike. So yeah, and my partner in crime isn't here either, Kyle, so he just had a volleyball tournament, so he's at home. So yeah, we're just the two of us today. And yeah, I'm, for most of you, I'm Brian, Vice President, and Mike, as I mentioned, President, Mike Ducheco, not here today, but he is on Zoom, so he'll probably, speak up every once in a while when I'm missing out on a cue or something. So first off, welcome. It's been beautiful weather. I don't know how far people usually come for this, but I know a few people come from a little far away, and the weather definitely helps. But do we have any new members today? Is there anybody here in the room that are new? I don't know if Bill knows if there's anybody specifically new. No, Zoom? No? Speak up, yeah. Okay. Announcements. We'll start with announcements, Don? Or, yeah. Want to start? Yeah, Ed? Sorry. Yeah, Ed, sorry.
No, that's all right.
Yeah. There's Don's and there's Ed's, there's
John's
Mike's.
behind me.
Yeah, okay.
The parking lot.
Yeah.
I'm going to be doing the last presentation. That will discourage a lot from being here. It's going to be on sound. And in the broadest sense that you can think of, not particularly phonographs, but objects that make sound, mainly historical kinds of things. I have a fair amount of that kind of stuff. But I'm looking for anyone who thinks they may have something very unusual. It was either used for work or for pleasure. Because if you look at sounds, there's the sounds of work and the sounds of pleasure. Not the pleasure you may be thinking of, but pleasure sounds. It could be something like a super rare reproducer, for instance. But rare, not common. I'm not particularly looking for phonographs, but if somebody has something very unusual. But I'm hoping that people have an object. I'm looking for a thing, not so much to talk about these things that you can't see, but things we can actually look at, have a historical significance, and are related to sound. They rely on sound or the use of sound. Well, that's very obtuse.
And what was the purpose again for this?
So if anybody has anything to speak to, I'm looking for things for like 3 minutes. I don't want to bore people to death. I expect to speak no more than maximum 50 minutes.
Perfect.
Because to the membership, people don't hear after 50 minutes. That's why the lecture was created to be 50 minutes. And after that, it becomes moving breeze minutes. Just a bit of advice. But if you have an interesting object, and think broadly, don't think just phonograph.
That's usually all we think, though, isn't it?
Pardon me?
That's all we usually think is phonographs, is it not? No.
Look around.
Okay.
Well, I think you'll find it interesting.
Yeah.
Some of the objects that we don't tend to see or know of or think of it in that way.
Sure.
But sound was for work or for sound and pleasure. So,
Ed, when are you gonna have the talk?
Yeah.
pardon me?
When are you gonna have the talk? Next week? You're gonna have a presentation about all these things?
Yes,
But when is that?
June.
Oh, June, all right.
When most of you are away, I won't.
Yeah.
I'll be on holiday. It's gonna
I'll be sick then.
Enjoying the last meeting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Ed. Okay. The other announcement, Mike. Brian.
At the the presentation at the next meeting. Shall I stand up? Presentation at the next meeting will be a show and tell. We do a show and tell every year, and I try and think of a different theme for it. And this year, what I'd like to suggest is that members find and talk about the machine that means the most to them in terms of the restoration that was required. It may have been a complete basket case that they had to completely rebuild and spent 5 years doing, or it may be one that they got cheap, took home and just polished it up and transformed it in an instant. So what would be interesting to hear is what machine was it? Maybe we can see it, which would be really good. And if you can tell us what steps you went through in order to get it restored. So, and how difficult it was. So we can learn a bit about products like we did when Alex spoke about his Victor 6. We can learn about products and methods and ways of transforming the machine and bringing it back to its original glory. So please, those of you on Zoom, as well as those of you in the room, please consider bringing out a machine for the next meeting and telling us the story behind it.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Any other announcements? Any announcements for anybody on Zoom? They want to speak up and say.
Well, in fact, sorry, I should have just added,
Yep.
can somebody please contact me if you have a machine you want to do that, because I need to get it organised. So
Yeah.
let me know if you would like to do it, either on Zoom or in the room, and then I'll be able to schedule the whole thing and plan it for you.
Sounds good. Just a quick one for myself. Everybody knows I usually have needles for sale. I still have some today. I noticed recently the phonograph shop has been sold out and they've been for a while on back order. I do plan on putting in a big order from Chamberlain Needles. I know they do advertise. I've never used them before, but I will be getting them, and they also have spear tip needles. So I will be stocking those as well. So if anybody wants any, send me an email, send me a message, text, whatever, if you're looking for needles. So, Bill, do you want to do your announcement on the CAP project?
I just thought I'd take a couple minutes of your time to,
Hopefully everybody can hear you on Zoom. Yeah, we can.
to introduce you to a couple new entries in the CAP project. Mark, can you pull up CAP?
Yeah, okay.
I've been stalled at 181 for a long time, which is still a remarkable number of Canadian-made phonographs. 81, sorry.
Where is it?
Just go down.
It's down there. Oh, there it is. There it is.
Click on there. Right. Okay.
Okay, hold on. I got to share it. Just a second.
So if you could go to
Share the screen.
It's,
Yeah. Okay.
there you go.
if you could go to leader. Just stop this up. There we go.
There you
Leader.
go.
Yeah.
Just
this-
remind us
Leader.
what these are, Bill,
Okay.
Remind you. Sorry.
what this is.
Oh, okay, just stay at the top there, Mark. So the Canadian Antique Phonograph Project attempts to identify and document in advertisements and in photographs every photograph made in Canada, manufactured in Canada. Now made in Canada can mean 51% of it is made in Canada. And the rest of it could be imported. But as long as the last major, I'm trying to say, these were all assembled in Canada. And therefore, with 51% Canadian content, usually the cabinet, they are deemed made in Canada. Leader is made by the T. Eaton Company. Now, Amphion is the major brand of the T. Eaton Company. And there's a page on Amphion. But I discovered a couple of ads in June and in August of 1920. And this is all I've been able to find where the T. Eaton Company advertised Leader. If you can scroll down, I never had any hopes of actually finding a Leader phonograph. And there's only ever one model, this $47.50 upright model. Scroll down a bit more. Next one. That was only in June and August of 1920. And then lo and behold, I found in Facebook Marketplace, which I check every couple of days, an actual leader. It's at the bottom. You can see it's a dead match to the ad. The cabinet is a single door with the knob on the left. Unfortunately, this is missing the grill. But otherwise, it's that's the machine. Can you scroll to the bottom, Mark? I've learned that if I message the owners of Facebook Marketplace and ask them for a good detailed photograph of the label, about 50% of them will reply to me and they'll send me a photograph. Most of the other 50% just ignore me. But this is what I need for the index page of the app project. If you could go back to the index page.
Oh, the,
Yeah, just go back in the browser to the index page.
oh, you went too far. Oops, so what the hell did I do? Just a second.
That's,
Oh, that, there.
there we go. And if you could go to Burton and Baldwin. There we go. Just stop there for a second. Now, this is a machine you're not likely to ever find. Angelo found it on Facebook there in the last couple of days as well. Just want to click on it. Burton and Baldwin is a cabinet maker in Hamilton, Ontario. And I was able to find that their first ad in the Globe newspaper in 1902. And they advertised every couple of years, asking for help, finishers, bench shapers, cabinet makers. They advertised from 1902 to 1923. And then in 1924, they put their business up for sale. And at the very bottom, you'll see a Burton and Baldwin upright phonograph, which looks like any other upright phonograph.
I took the controller.
But how many of these are likely to be out there?
Notice with the Canadian machines, they always have that peculiar tone on design.
Oh, yes, okay,
That sort of tone on.
okay.
The ones.
They're all universal tone arms. Can you go down right down to the bottom, Mark? A lovely
Excellent. Now, where do you normally get your newspaper clippings?
Two sources. The Toronto Public Library provides free access to the Globe and the Toronto Daily Star, all the way back to the 1880s and 90s. Okay, so that's one very good source. The other source, which I don't have at the moment, is a site in the States called newspapers.com. It's connected to ancestry.com. Okay. It costs about $120 for 6 months. So okay. my subscription is lapsed at the moment. Yeah. I'm waiting till I have another 10 or 15 machines that I need to try to find more information about. Newspapers.com probably has a Hamilton newspaper, and I might be able to find out more information. The Spectator, the person involved in the Spectator. Yeah. So when I get in newspapers.com, I may find more ads for that. If you could go to Silvertone. Now, Silvertone is a major American brand. Just click on that. Sears and Roebuck. Steve is Sears and Roebuck. Yeah. Brought out Silvertone. But I found ads for a Silvertone in Canada by a strange company called Rapage Communion Cup.
That's a mouthful.
On Dundas Street in Toronto. Yeah. And I had no hopes of ever finding an actual Silvertone made by the Communion Cup Company, but lo and behold, a couple of months ago, one appeared on Facebook Marketplace. Wow. There it is. Looking very similar to the console models above. And this was another ad where I messaged the owner, and she very kindly sent me a beautiful detailed photograph of the label.
Oh, wow. Is the owner in Canada?
One more. There we go. Look at that. Silvertone, manufactured by Lepage Company, Toronto, Canada. This is the gold standard in the CAP project. If I can get a label that says manufactured in the city.
Is the owner in Canada? You know.
Can't remember. But if you just go up, yes, in Canada, if you just go up to the beginning of the photographs, up one more, yeah, there. Where do I say it?
Sherbrooke.
Sherbrooke, Quebec.
That's near Montreal.
Yeah. Finally, if you could go to Premier, and then just stop before opening. Okay, stop there.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So on the right there, you'll see a label for Premier. And if you look on the left side, one down, you'll see another label for Premier. Now, the one on the right was manufactured in Ontario. The one on the left was manufactured in British Columbia. One of the few brands that was manufactured in British Columbia. And if you look closely, they're using the same Gothic font. And really the only difference is in the T, whereas the British Columbia company has a much more elaborate T. And this is very, very strange to me. The Premier, to go to the first Premier mark on the right, this is well documented by Jennifer Muir as a Canadian company that manufactured the Premier in Canada. There we go, there's Premier. And you can see the logo on the cabinet. But the T is sort of truncated at the bottom, but still it's that Gothic font. Now if you go to the other Premier, British.
Well, it's.
Now this is well documented in newspapers as made in British Columbia, made in Victoria, the only phonograph made in Victoria, BC.
Would it be all right to interject a quick comment here?
Sure, yes.
The fellow who had this company, his name was Percy George.
Yes.
And his, I think it's his great granddaughter is Karina George. I know Karina through music here. And one of these machines came up for sale briefly in Vancouver, and I sent her a link to it because I know that at one time she had asked me to keep an eye open for one of the phonographs that her relative had made. And she reminded me that 30 years ago, in fact, I had found one for her. So she does have an example of one of these at this time. The ad in Vancouver disappeared very quickly, so I wasn't able to do a screen grab, although there's a chap, my first name Lance, whose last name I'm sorry I can't come up with, did take some images of the one that was for sale. So I think he had the intention of putting them onto the website here.
Yes, Lance Hussoy, one of our members in British Columbia, has been very, very thorough and very good to send me photographs of any machines that he finds on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace that I don't have access to in British Columbia. And he sent me the link to this particular made in British Columbia. Go right to the bottom, you'll see there's the ID. It's very clear that the Premier phonograph company is see. Now, what was interesting was a couple of days ago, Lance sent me a link to a Premier, a console model, I believe, and I looked at it, and it had the Ontario label, not the British Columbia label, and yet it's for sale right now in Victoria, BC. Just find that strange and rather curious. Is there a connection between the two companies that I'm missing? Very clearly, one was manufactured in Ontario and one was manufactured in BC. And yet, an Ontario Premier is for sale right now in Victoria, BC, home of the British Columbia Premier. Anybody has any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Music boxes were assembled as just a standard, and various companies would put their own labels on them, made by such and such. They weren't made by that company. They didn't even have factories. I'm wondering if they were going to produce a label and sell them in Ontario with a thought of expanding their business. Watch companies did that. Like you get a pocket watch from a certain town,
So
but they never made Waltham watch. It just has their engraving on it.
So are you suggesting there's only one company manufacturing Premier?
It could be, and they were going to sell them in Ontario, big market.
But we have them well documented that there was a Premier manufactured in Ontario, and a
And?
separate Premier manufactured.
Yeah, I'm just talking about labels,
Okay.
interchanging labels. They don't necessarily tell you the truth.
For some strange reason, they both decided to use almost identical labels. I just find that curious. More research. That's all I have.
Thank you, Bill. Question?
Yeah.
Both of these companies also had something to do with music. I've got a Premier with that same.
Which one, the Ontario label or the BC label?
Well, they're both similar.
But which one is it?
I got one made in Pennsylvania. You know, so there's some connection. Between Pennsylvania and Ontario. You know, a Star made them in Indiana and one in London, Ontario.
I've noticed the American premiers though, there's a slight difference in the detail.
But there is an American premium.
Oh, yeah, there is an American too, but there is a little difference.
So you're suggesting that
There's
there's
an article, she had the Toronto premier being manufactured at the junction. So just outside.
right. Are you suggesting that there is some connection between the Ontario manufactured Premier and the British Columbia manufactured?
Well, it's possible because like, the thing is, the Ontario one, more likely than the first one because.
It was in fact the second one. The BC one was the first one.
Oh, okay.
I found ads in 1918, 19 for the BC one. And Jennifer Mueller, in her documentation, says that Premier in Ontario first appeared in late 1922. BC is first. Anyway, it's just.
May I interject here as well?
Yes.
Yeah, the one that was up for sale in BC, the person who was selling it bought it from the family of the original owner. And the original owner had been an apprentice in the factory in Victoria. And he bought it when he worked in the factory building the machines. So the machines were definitely built in Victoria.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Is he still alive? If that person is still alive, then.
I have no idea because I did not contact the seller, and the seller was once removed from the family of the original. You know, there was the family of the original owner, so the seller did not buy it from the original owner, but rather from the family. So I suspect that the original owner is probably deceased or whatever.
Very old.
Thank you, lads. You keep sending me links. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Any comments, questions?
I'm actually, I don't know if this is relevant here, but I am looking for a Columbia recorder for a cylinder machine.
Okay. So you're looking for a Columbia recorder?
Yeah.
And just state your name and people can hear you on Zoom and stuff?
Tyler Burgess.
Yeah. Okay. That should be present some later, so. Okay.
Anybody else have comments?
Okay, so yeah, next, I guess, I mean, we haven't really been doing the we need this, but is there anybody looking for any parts or anything specific, anything else besides what Taylor said? So. No? Nobody on Zoom looking for anything specific to finish off a machine? You might want to finish it off before June's meeting so we can get the stuff in for our May's meeting, right? May's meeting is when we're doing the show and tell. Yes, so you need that part real quick before you can get it, finished off for May's meeting. Okay, so for our presentation, we've got the Just Saying. Yeah, so we got Don for the Just Saying segment. Okay, come on up.
So the Just Saying question today comes with a bit of a backstory. A couple of years ago, I embarked, which I wasn't planning on, restoring Finola, which had the orthophonic set up with the metal diaphragm, aluminum diaphragm, and I couldn't find one, so of course, it's me, I decided to make one, and found out that they're actually really cheap and easy to make with a 3D mold. So I did a bunch of those, and then because I had the diaphragms, I thought, well, I might as well make reproducers as well. So I made a metal reproducer. Don't look very closely because I'm a bit of a Rambo solderer, so I melted the whole piece of the brass out while I was doing it. It needs to be remade. Another one, 3D print, and they work remarkably well, really good. And just as a side note, sure, yep, just don't click the messy solder job too close. It's coming with JB Weld now. And just a side note, because I've talked to some people about this before, this is a 3D printed TPU gasket. And these can be printed any shape, any size, and I've used them and they're really good, actually. I kind of, because I print on glass beds, it's actually extremely glass smooth and kind of sticky. You can take a look at it. So now that I'm building reproducers, I want to go back to building a reproducer that's not orthophonic, that has the regular mica in it. So I have two examples in my collection, and this one, when I restored it, this one has TPU gaskets in it. They're red because I pimped out this machine. So I have two reproducers to go from, and the question is, as always, does size matter? Right? This works great. It's the exhibition. Everybody has these, works great, but it's tiny compared to this. So, because, yeah. And because I'm not restoring anything, I'm building from scratch, I could make this 6 inches if I want to. And so the question is, do you get better sounds, more quality, better tone, the bigger you go? And like I say, I'm not fixing anything, restoring anything, so I can do whatever I want. My lathe will take 10 inches in metal, so I can make it 10 inches if I really wanted to.
So
Are you asking?
Metal lathe, yeah.
I know that sounds ridiculous from the, like, but are you saying these things, 3D manufacturing system?
This is metal, like old school metal lathe, milling machine, like that. This one is all 3D printed. And like I say, this sounds great. I have some needles here, you can play with it, but you can hear it from there. It picks up no problem at all. This is carbon fiber with the needle bar. The rest of it's just regular PLA. It's PLA plastic is basically sugar, corn sugar. So it's biodegradable. And apparently if you were starving, you could eat it, but I'll stick with hot dogs.
That's why we brought Peter here.
Me and the donuts, I didn't bring the donuts.
The reproducer?
Are you serious? I bring you from your house every day, I never get
No
donuts.
donuts, where did they come from?
Mr. Nix.
Oh, okay. Ta-da.
Yeah.
So-
You don't have to eat
So back to the question, is it bigger, better? Yeah,
So, as we'll talk about today, it amplifies the sound. So remember the pressure is coming from the needle,
right,
right? So there's only a finite amount of force coming from that needle.
right,
And I would think the physics might work this way, that there's an ideal size of a reproducer that needle can transfer its energy to, and you get an amplification of the sound. If the reproducer was perhaps too big, not enough energy could be transferred from the needle to that reproducer to properly amplify the sound. And that's the job of the reproducer. So if you can transfer enough energy to the reproducer from the record and the needle,
right,
the larger reproducer should create a greater amplification of the sound, and you should have a louder playing phonograph, but not necessarily a better.
okay.
Yeah, that's my.
I think that's probably true, because this is definitely louder. So going between these two, I would say this is probably a louder sound. I don't really notice quality.
It can't be better.
Right.
I think the material of the diaphragm might influence the quality of the sound.
Yeah.
So is a harder, thinner material better?
I don't know. I would think that aluminum. I know that you're trying to do mica in this case, but
Yeah.
I guess the
Or
thinner.
something.
I guess thinner works better. Don't know.
Well, we'll touch on this today. Remember, material resonates.
Right.
All right, and so that would have a range of frequencies. The material that you use would impact how different sound frequencies are reproduced. And so some materials might have a broader spectrum and a greater ability to produce a wider range of frequencies. That material, I would think, would be a better material for a reproducer.
But when I started doing these diaphragms, because you can't buy aluminum shim stock, because there's no point in shimming something with a piece of aluminum, it would just squish out. So shim stock only really comes in brass. So to get the right thickness, I did the first few in brass until I discovered that, and I work metric, not so I think this is like 3 thou, something like that, but I'm totally guessing. So I work metric. But I discovered that meat pie trays are exactly the right thickness of aluminum. So off to the dollar store, bought a bunch of meat pie trays.
I did the same thing.
And so these are meat pie tray made into the diaphragm. But because I was anxious before I decided on the meat pie thing, I did do them in brass. So I have a selection of different thicknesses of brass and then the aluminum ones. And they all, and maybe it's just aging ears, but they all sound exactly the same to me. Like when I put one in, then the other, because I thought, I could afford a piece of brass, so I could make them in brass if I want. But I really didn't notice a difference in the sound. The aluminum sounded just as good and pretty much the same. So I guess the trick is to build them in a varying of sizes and materials that you can clip in and out, which is great for 3D print, because I can do that and just click them in and see how far you have to go before you lose sound. Okay, that's good. That's a great jumping off point.
Yeah, I did the same aluminum pie tin thing. You'll see that in a little bit later.
I should have asked you first before. I bucked up about 40 pieces of brass at $1,000 a pound.
I actually used one thing I used, and this is interesting. I used the bottom of a plastic water bottle, and it actually worked really well. It sounded really good.
Yeah, well, Don Schreier said that the cap on Pringles chips also makes a good diaphragm. He was saying, so of course I went out and bought Pringle chips, not because I like the chips, only for the lid. And so, and they do work. So it's curious because what I've experienced so far is it doesn't seem to make a huge amount of difference, which is why I thought maybe it's the size that you're after, because the materials I haven't noticed are hugely different, but the size seems to make, and like you say, probably more the amplification than anything else.
You know, Blaine and I had a conversation a while back. I don't know if he's here, but he had a fairly strong opinion, and he referred to the transition to the exhibition reproducer, the Victrola 2 reproducer.
Right.
Victrola 2 is much larger, and he thought it gave better clarity and made a louder sound. I don't know if he's here, but he could elaborate. In his mind, the Victor company had made the decision to go larger. But of course, they went back to a smaller reproducer when they went for products, so maybe they changed their mind.
Yeah. Well, that did pass my notice too, that they themselves went from the exhibition to a much larger size reproducer. So there had to have been some sort of reason for that.
And they would have had some science behind that.
Yeah,
But
to
again,
have made that.
smaller with
Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, I gotta say though, Mark, you gotta tell your story about that piece of wood gramophone you have, and how the sound just travels through a piece of wood into the finishing. The very first gramophone made in Canada.
Oh, the US talking machine. It's, maybe I'll bring it for your thing. It's a early machine that was made to infringe on Berliner's patents. So it's really quite early. And it's just a little turntable in a box, and you turn the turntable by hand. But the sound is transmitted. There's a piece of wood with a nail stuck through it or a pin. And it goes, the piece of wood is held by a wire that's turned into a spring, which there's no springiness. And the headphone tube is literally jammed into the spring. Like, it makes no sense that this would work at all. And yet it's
sounds very good.
Yeah, there's no diaphragm at all.
It's just the vibrations go, what, 8 inches through solid wood.
And then into a piece of metal that you've pushed a tube into. I'll bring it at the next, at Mike's
And
meeting.
then there are those pathing machines with the huge diaphragm. Those ones with the vertical, the ones for the vertical cut center start discs, so with the huge diaphragm on them.
Oh, they sound great.
Yeah.
They really sound good.
Okay.
Very good.
Good. I'll leave this gasket up here if anybody wants to take a look at it. And just adding to that, if any members want me to print gaskets like this for them, I am totally happy to do it. It takes no time. Well, you're not at the machine anyways, so it takes no time, and I'm happy to do it for members.
Thank you so much.
You introduced it.
Yep, okay, so we ready for the presentation from, I gotta check your names here, Tyler and Greg. Greg, Tyler, I'll let you introduce yourselves and your topics, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good.
Mark, you want us here?
Yeah. Just,
There you are.
Yeah, yep, okay.
I like the one on the right.
All right, right camera. Sorry?
Your ears.
All right, so today my father and I are going to take a close look at the similarities between the phonograph and the human sound system. Last spring, my father, he had a cochlear implant, so he knows a little more about hearing and phonographs as a result of this. But let's do a quiz first. Next slide. So we have a Victor 4 here, before us, whatever you want to say. And it's got an external horn, which is by far one of the more prominent features of older machines. So what part of the human sound system corresponds with the horn? Next one. The outer ear, next one. The eardrum, or the big mouth, as so eloquently displayed by Ethel Merman. Okay, so who wants to go first?
Any takers?
The big mouth?
Yep.
I think it's Ethel.
The outer ear?
It's Ethel? It's Ethel.
Yes.
Gotta be. Yeah, it's Ethel. It's always Ethel.
What's the answer, Tyler?
Yeah, so most people seem to select the outer ear in most cases. Even my dad's audiologist did when he asked him that question. But as you guys pretty much said, it is the mouth. If it's recording, which is like with an Edison recorder, obviously we have an Edison standard here, but obviously it has the C reproducer. But if it has the recorder attachment on it, then it is the ear. But in most cases, it's the mouth. Just going through my notes here. So we are going to examine how the phonograph produces sound. But instead of examining how humans produce sound, we're going to follow the sound waves from the phonograph to the ear. Besides, it's a presentation for the Canadian Antique Phonograph Society, and but a presentation about the way the human sound production works will more best be received by the Canadian Antique Pipe Organ Society. And they're kind of an odd group indeed. I highly doubt, however, that they would be interested in how the lungs and the vocal cords resemble a pipe organ. So by contrast, we're a august and significantly curious, scientifically curious group. So first, my father will give us a short premiere on sound since he can't hear very well.
Thank you, Tyler. So next slide, Mark, if you would. Now, I want to preface the rest of this presentation that it incorporates physics, chemistry, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, and medicine. And I have no expertise in any of those topics. I was trained in the humanities, economics, and finance, and mathematics. I have an MBA from the University of Chicago, which means I'm mediocre but arrogant. So this learning and what we're going to share with you has actually come about through my hearing loss, and then this idea of connecting the ear to the phonograph. And the first thing that we need to understand, and not to take away your presentation coming up, what is sound? So sound is a vibration, and it can displace a medium, which is gas, a liquid, or a solid. So we know that sound gets generated from a phonograph from a needle, but when it gets to the ear, it creates a wave, and it's a pressure wave. So a sound wave is really, if you took a slinky, think of it this way. If you took a slinky and went like this, what would happen? The wave would move across the slinky, and parts of the slinky would move closer together and compress, and then refract or rarefact, move apart. And that's actually what's happening here. You have a speaker emitting a volume of sound or a vibration that's causing the air to compress and then refract, if you will, or rarefact is what is the term. And that's just a pressure wave. And scientifically, we look at it through a pressure wave, if you will, and you'll notice that this wave is increasing when the pressure goes up, and it falls when the pressure goes down. Now, next slide. Sound waves are combine additively. Sound waves combine additively. So I just created a spreadsheet here and put in a sine function, and the yellow wave is a sine wave with a certain amplitude, and the blue wave is the same sine wave with a higher amplitude. If I played those two sounds together and combined them, we would have a higher amplification. they combine additively, and the green wave, which is the combination of the two sound waves. If the sound waves are in phase, i.e. they're emitting pressure at the same rate, frequency, they will combine and give you more amplification. So if you had two phonographs playing the same record simultaneously and you played them together, you would get greater amplification of the sound. Now, sound waves can also cancel each other out. Here I have two sound waves of identical frequency, and they're out of phase. So one sound wave is creating pressure. At the same time, the other sound wave is taking pressure away from a medium as it moves through, and they cancel one of another out, and you have no sound to the human. That's how noise canceling headphones work. So when a phonograph is played, next slide here, we need a record, and we have, what is this, a Victor 5, Tyler?
I believe Victor 5 or Victor 6. Oh, 6. Oh, 6. Yeah,
I told you we would make all kinds of errors in this presentation, right? Too many topics.
Yeah, so many of the Victor 6.
Go ahead and play that, Mark, if you play that record. So this is Ethel Merman.
That's right.
Words poetic, I'm so pathetic that I always have found it best, instead of getting them off my chest.
This actually, you can get all kinds of apps you can put on your phone and turn your microphone into sort of like an oscilloscope. And this is a bit of that recording and the sound wave that's generated from that recording. And it's a very complex wave. It's a combination of all kinds of vibrations coming together at the same time. And it produces a very unusual wave that changes in frequency and amplification as it goes upon. But that's just one wave. It's only one wave. So what the phonograph has to do is, instead of, as an example, these are tuning forks. If I take this tuning fork, can you hear that? I can't hear it. Okay, we'll test your hearing. It emits a continuous vibration of continuous frequency. This is 440 hertz, which means the wave, in 1 second, there's 440 cycles. It's a continuous signal, no variation in that signal. So the amplitude of that wave is the same as you go across, and the frequency of the wave is continuous. But when we combine two waves, for example, these are two tuning forks at different frequencies. When we combine them, we get what I call a complex wave. That they're adding the two sounds together, and then when we put the Johnny Green orchestra on here in Ethel Merman, we get something that looks really ugly, actually, but some consider it to be beautiful. So that anything that's going to reproduce that sound has to create a wave that looks identical to this, right? So all of this, at least that's what that record looks like of a piece of sound. We get a sound wave that looks like that. And then the other thing I would point out is that materials have resonance. So if I take this tuning fork, Mark, you can hold this at the very base. These are of the same frequency. I test that. Can you feel that?
Yeah, it's vibrating.
It vibrates. It picks up the vibrations. And some tuning forks, if they're strong enough, put them apart, the other one will vibrate. So material resonates given its mass, its density, its composition at a certain frequency, if it's pure. So you have two tuning forks, they will resonate if they're the same frequency. And so the materials that we use in these instruments, we don't want them to resonate at a certain frequency, if we think about it. And we'll actually talk about how the human ear resonates in a way. So Tyler, let's look at the phonograph and see how it generates sound, and then compare that to the human ear.
Right.
Do you want the next slide?
Yeah, next slide. So Phonographs, as you would know, are beautiful instruments, and it is a shame that we can't produce ones that are that beautiful today. Crap with phones. We do know that there are specific types of records or cylinders that will produce a good sound. And we have here images. We have a microscopic image of a 78 and one of an Edison cylinder. And the 78 has the ridges on one side of the groove. If it was stereo, like on modern LPs, it would have them on both sides, creating stereo sound. Also, as you would probably know, the Edison, the 78s, for the most part, there are exceptions obviously, have the grooves, they go back and forth. Whereas with the cylinder, it's up and down. So vertical, lateral cut and vertical cut is the difference there. The 78 causes when you're playing a 78 or any lateral cut disc, the needle will go back and forth. Whereas with any vertical cut records, diamond discs, Pathes, cylinders, etc., it'll go up and down. So the needle is, of course, a key element in a phonograph. And the material for the needle, along with its thickness, usually in the form of soft steel, can have a dramatic impact on the quality of the sound. The needle must transmit the vibrations. In the grooves, it's vibrations that will be converted into sound waves. So here we have Victrola ninth that I have playing Hang Out the Stars of Indiana with, I assume, Ray Noble and Al Bowley. So you can see here the needle, you can't see the vibrations, they're way too minuscule to see, but the needle tracks along there, but also it vibrates as it goes along. So that's a microscopic, sort of a macro shot of that. It's not too blown up to the point where you can see the grooves or anything, but that's what we have there. Okay, next. So we can't hear the vibrations of the needle across space unless you're really close up to it. So we needed to amplify them, and that is the job of a reproducer or sound box to help amplify this. I have spent quite a bit of time fiddling with these things over time, making my own. I haven't done much rebuilding of them in the past. Usually the ones I get are okay. So this one here is one of the ones that I've built. It's my most recent one. I hold this up to the camera so you can see. It's one at home. So this one is very simple construction. Sorry, that's not as good as the 3D printed ones we saw earlier, but anyways. This one is a very simple design. It's just a wire nut with a hole drilled in it that holds the needle in place. And then the needle bar is a piece of model railway rail that's been bent into the shape of the needle bar, and that's glued in place to an aluminum pie tin diaphragm. So unfortunately, this is not corrugated, but it still works. And so that's good. And the reproducer is made out of plastic, and it's just built around that. There are foam gaskets in there to help out. The other two that I have, this one is from a Birch portable, actually branded as Victor, but it's probably Birch, made from the 30s. You can see that there. This one is an orthophonic, so it has an aluminum diaphragm. This one is, of course, mainly designed for electrically recorded discs. The next one we have is progressing backwards. We have a Victor Exhibition, one of the more common ones you'll find. And this one has, of course, a mica diaphragm. Hold this up to the camera. Again, I'm pretty sure you all know what an exhibition looks like. But this is mica, and so this is mainly for older acoustic discs. Of course, you can play the other ones. You can swap back and forth, but anyways. This one is mica, and it's got much older design. The other one, the last one we have here, is a much older reproducer for a Columbia Q cylinder machine. So you can see that unlike, say, our exhibition here, the orientation of the needle is different. This one is, of course, designed for vertical cut, so it's so it sits like that, whereas the exhibition sits like this. Oh, sorry. There you go. So the orientation is different for the different types of the discs. And of course, the stylus are different too.
Next slide. Yep.
So once the reproducer creates a pressure wave, it is channeled and maintained by the tone arm. Of course, this applies to acoustic machines. It is amplified further by the horn. And that's how simple it is. The machine, the mechanics of this is all very simple. Materials of the tone arm and the horn do affect the sound waves, the quality of the sound you hear. That's why, of course, brass horns sound a little less, quality than, say, aluminum or even wood. Yeah, that's how it works. Now we'll take a look at the human ear process and compare that to the sound and how it processes the sound from the phonograph.
So the human ear works in reverse of the phonograph. And last night, I've been coming to these meetings for, I don't know, how old were you?
I was 10.
10. He was the youngest member by 50 years in this.
So 8 years.
And I really hadn't learned over that period of time that much about phonographs. I've learned a lot in the last week putting this together. But the human ear is very similar to a point to the phonograph, and it takes the sound wave of the phonograph and creates that vibration in our system in the same way. And I'll show that. And it dawned on me last night that, hey, wait a minute. Edison and Bell probably weren't that much of a genius because we've been dissecting the human ear since the 1500s. And the structure of the human ear was known, and I had this sense that that probably led these guys to develop the telephone and the phonograph. And in fact, I looked last night. I did a search this morning, and there's a human phonograph or whatever. Bell took the section of the human ear from here to here, attached it to a horn, and put a needle at the end of, we'll talk about this, the stapes, and wrote, and it carved sound waves or into glass. And that's before, it's a macabre looking structure, right? It's before the phonograph was invented. So they were using the structure of the human ear to create the phonograph, really. Now, the human ear, of course, the pinna or the outer ear is the horn of the human ear, and it collects the sound and it channels it down through the canal to the eardrum. That's the outer ear. And those of you who said A in the beginning were right if the phonograph is acting as a recorder. So let's look now at the middle ear, which is the mechanical part of our hearing. Mark, if you could go to the next slide, please. The middle ear consists of the eardrum and these 3 bones. So somewhere in grade school or something, you had to do the anatomy of the human ear. And these are called the ossicles. And essentially, sound comes in through the canal of the ear, and it vibrates that eardrum. The eardrum is about 1/3 of the size of a penny. and it transmits those vibrations to those 3 bones, which then press on the cochlea. That's exactly how a reproducer works. And in fact, the stapes, the last bone in this sequence, is the needle of the ear. So if we go to our next slide, one thing here further about the middle ear. This coming in here is the eustachian tube down here at the bottom. For human hearing to work well, the pressure in the middle ear, the air pressure, needs to be the same as that in the canal. So when you fly, you're aware of this. You go up, the pressure in the middle ear is higher than the outside air pressure. You don't hear very well because it puts a lot of pressure on the eardrum and it cannot vibrate well. And so you get this muted sense of sound. And the reverse happens when you land in a plane. So the eustachian tube is very important in terms of keeping the air pressure the same in the canal, and the middle ear of the ear won't work. It would be the same for a reproducer, right? The pressure needs to be the same on both sides of that diaphragm for a reproducer to work well. Now, next slide is the middle ear and the stapes. The stapes is the needle of the ear. Now, when the eardrum is vibrated, it puts those 3 bones in motion, and the stapes delivers the force of that vibration to the cochlea. And the cochlea is the element of the ear that we've really only come to understand in the last 30 years. So probably if you had to put together a model of the ear, we knew what the cochlea was since the 1500s, but we didn't know that well how it worked. And it just looks like a snail. But this is where sound is created. And there's another aspect of this system. The eardrum is about a third of the size of a penny. The stapes has a footprint on the cochlea, called the oval window here, that is about 14 times smaller than the size of that diaphragm. It increases the force by a factor of 18. If we were to look at the physics behind this, when this vibrates and you translate that vibration to that smaller point, the vibration, its force increases by a factor of 18. So the eardrum and the stapes is amplifying those sound waves. That's why you shouldn't stick anything in your ear. So I know none of us listen to the doctors, right? But I can tell you, if you need this apparatus to hear, you won't mess with it. And in fact, if you go onto the Encyclopedia Britannica website and type in human hearing, you can actually see a video of the eardrum vibrating and working. It's fascinating. Now, what does that stapes do? It translates or submits the vibrations into the cochlea. This is a fluid-filled package. And sound waves, or any vibration, travels faster through fluid than it does through air. It also travels much faster through steel. So I think in certain, like in mines and so forth, they would put a long piece of steel in and the sound would come out faster than it would through air. So the medium in which you pass these vibrations has an impact. Now, let's go to the next slide and look at the cochlea. The way I like to think about the cochlea having an implant in this organ is the cochlea is really like a packaged record or a cylinder. So here we have an Edison cylinder packaged up. You can't see the grooves. And you can't see how that cylinder works, but it's packaged up and you're told it makes sound, and it does when we play it. So does the cochlea. And I would bet that most people in this group, if we looked at their cochlea, there would be a picture of Edison printed on their cochlea somewhere. Here, I have it there at the middle. It's probably Mark's cochlea. Now, the cochlea is responsible for 2 things. our balance. So up here, these semicircular canals help us with our balance. There's fluid in there. You can think of it as, what's the tool that we use to measure?
Spirit level.
Yeah, level, a simple level. And that's in fact is what's going on there, and it's tied to a nerve that helps us keep our balance. The rest of it is our auditory nerve. So now let's actually look inside this package of the cochlea. Next slide. So when the stapes transmits that vibration, which is not sound, by the way. Sound is, well, I'll get to that in a second. They're vibrations, they're pressure waves, right? And it's transmitting that pressure wave to the fluid of the cochlea. The cochlea exists, has 3 chambers. This top chamber, the bottom chamber, and the middle. In the middle is where it's at. But you'll notice that this cochlea is kind of stretched out, that the vibrations go into the fluid. And if you were to vibrate water, it seems to amplify and move quickly, right? That's why it's so hard to carry a glass of water across the room, especially with age, right? So that's going on inside the cochlea. And this vibration passes through the fluid and comes out what we call the round window. Cochlea has to have a way to get the vibration out. And so that vibration's going through there continuously and with different frequencies and different amplitude over time. Inside the middle of the cochlea is where all of this is at. These are where, I don't know, have you ever heard the term a hair cell? A hair cell is a particular kind of cell that has, if you will, little hairs on the top of it that respond to this vibration. And we'll see how that happens. And it transmits, this is where the chemistry comes in. This fluid is ionic, which means it's a chemical, a molecule or an atom that has an extra electron or a freely passable electron, right? If it's positively ionic or negatively ionic. And it passes a charge through the nerve cells and stimulates the nerve. And when we spread the cochlea out in the next slide, this is the middle picture here on the left is what I want to look at. The middle of the cochlea, at the base of the middle of the cochlea is this thing called the basilar membrane. And that's a very important membrane. In the beginning of the cochlea, where the stapes hits it, it is narrow and very dense, thick. And as you move down the cochlea towards the end of the curl of it, it flattens out and becomes wider. It responds to different frequencies. So when we send a very high frequency wave down the cochlea, this part of the basilar membrane vibrates, or they used to say resonate. There's now a lot of controversy over actually whether it resonates. But it does respond, and you can think of it as resonating. And when it resonates, it pushes the basilar membrane upwards, right? And it then causes the hair cells to be pressed against the top membrane in that chamber, the tectoral membrane, and it stimulates an ionic response. An electrical response goes down to the nerve. There are 3,500 of these inner hair cells stemming from the beginning of this basilar membrane to the end of it. And there's 3 times as many of these outer hair cells. So we have about 15,000 hair cells in there. Yes, sir.
The hair bundle and the channel here, is that where the ear ringing comes from? People who suffer from the ringing of the ears, from the very fine hairs, is that coming from the hair bundle?
Is what coming from the hair bundle? The hearing?
No, the ringing in your ears. If you have
the ringing in the ears. That we don't know. We don't really know, but because I've had tinnitus. There's not a lot known about tinnitus and its sources. It would make sense that those cells are stimulating the auditory nerve in that region. Now, what I've got here, though, is what you want to think about is these hair cells are, this is one splice of this basilar membrane. And you go all the way down. So at the very entranceway of the cochlea, it's very sensitive to high frequency sounds. And the cochlea, this membrane vibrates right here only at high frequencies. And as you move through the cochlea, the membrane, its composition is changing. Its composition is changing, and it's vibrating to much lower frequencies. And across the cochlea are all these connections to the auditory nerve. You want to think 3,500 connections as you go around. Your ear can perceive far greater variations and vibrations than any musical instrument we can create and play, any phonograph record that you can develop. Our ears are much more sensitive. A piano has what, 88 keys? And then something like that. It's not even close in being able to differentiate various sound waves as the human ear is able to perceive. So that's how our hearing works. And now what's important about this is that the sound wave is not sound. What is it?
Pressure.
It's a pressure wave. It's vibration. It is not sound. Sound is perceptual. So what's interesting to me is, what is sound? Well, it's this pressure wave. It goes into the ear. The vibration gets changed into an electrical impulse that's transmitted to the brain. And we perceive that electrical impulse as sound, and clearly we all perceive it in the same way. Otherwise, Ethel Merman would be beautiful, right, when she sings. I'm just joking, but we tend to react negatively towards bad sounds and very positively towards what we call beautiful sounds. So we are all perceiving sound in the same way, largely. A turtle, its cochlea is really only very short, and it only picks up these low frequency sounds. A dog's cochlea is very different, and it picks up much higher frequency sounds than we have. So when you think about this phonograph, I'm sorry, sir, 10 years and I still don't know everybody's name. No, behind you, when you were talking about the reproducers, Don, right?
Yeah, Don.
So if you go back one slide, Mark, or two slides, when you were talking about the size of the reproducer, if we made the ear drum larger and kept the stapes the same size, the amplification of that sound wave or that pressure wave would be greater. So the stapes is where it's at. It's transmitting all of the pressure into the cochlea. And so if I make that diaphragm bigger and can get enough of the pressure down into the diaphragm, it's going to amplify the sound. It just makes the sound waves taller. Yes?
So what happens in the ear as we age to limit the Hertz range?
Well, let's go.
Failure?
Yeah, let's go to this guy. So every time we hear sound or that pressure wave at a certain frequency in a certain location of the cochlea, this basilar membrane flexes. What does it do? It presses these hair cells up against the tectoral membrane, and because of the fluid that's inside the ear, it passes an electron down here. You get an electrical impulse. What would happen if you put a very strong vibration of a certain frequency into the ear? This would flex by a greater amount, and it would press these nerve hair cells into the tectoral membrane. If you put too much pressure into the ear, you're going to damage these hair cells. So doctors will tell you, don't, wear earplugs, don't use earbuds, don't do all these things. Didn't bother me at all, but when you lose your hearing, some people have nerve deafness. And as we age, this mechanism breaks down.
The hair cells which begin to fail.
Yeah, hair cells can fail. They're actually working through stem cell technology to try to create new hair cells. So nerve deafness is the destruction of this. Now, my deafness, if we forward a couple of slides, well, I'll stop here. This is my point about sound. This age-old question that the philosophers ask, if a tree falls in a forest, it creates a vibration. I don't care whether we're there or not, it creates a vibration. Sound, is it real or is it just nervous energy? It's just creating a vibration. When our brain receives that vibration through an electrical impulse through the nervous system, we perceive it as sound. But there is no such thing as sound other than it's in our head. So different animals hear these vibrations differently. So that's a ridiculous question that the philosophers waste a lot of time over. And a tree falls, it creates a pressure wave. Whether somebody's there to intercept that pressure wave is a problem of location. So what happens when your hearing goes back? So next slide. These are my audiograms. And since we're asking this question about hearing does dissipate with age, I'm sorry to say. But these are my audiograms in 2005, 8, and 24. And they have the telltale sign of otosclerosis. Otosclerosis is a disease where you get bone growth on the stapes and into the cochlea. The cochlea is a bony structure on the outside of it. And if the stapes has bone growth on it, will it vibrate as well? It can actually become fused to the cochlea and not vibrate at all. And so because the stapes vibrates at very high frequencies to high-pitched sounds, if you degrade the stapes, it's not going to vibrate very well at high frequencies. If you degrade the needle on your phonograph, it's not going to play high-pitched sounds very well because it needs to vibrate very quickly and fluidly, if you think about it. So the first thing we see, this is the hearing and the level of decibels. And I had very severe hearing loss in 2005 in my right ear at the higher frequencies. We can hear sounds up to 20,000 cycles per second in the human ear, and most sound is heard from 250 hertz to about 6,000. So this didn't really interfere. This is the level of human speech in here. Not much with me hearing things. But by 2008, all of the measures of hearing at different frequencies were declining in the right ear, and they're also declining in the left ear. This is why I have such a good relationship with my family, because I can't hear a damn thing they've said over the last 20 years about me. Lucky. And here we are just this spring. I no longer have a right ear, and this is my left ear, and you can see that it's progressed. So what's actually going on? If you go to the next slide, I have a picture of this. This is otosclerosis. This is from the Cleveland Clinic, copyright 2021. Go to your site. The stapes here gets fused into the cochlea. It doesn't vibrate very well. It vibrates at low frequencies, but not very well at high frequencies. And one solution, which has been around for many years, is just to sear the stapes off here at its connection point, get rid of it, and put a prosthetic stapes in there. It takes about 30 minutes to do this, called a staplectomy. And here you actually see one in a real ear. And that vibrates. And people gain 85% of the hearing that they lost. In order for that to work, there are two ways that we hear. One is through the eardrum, but our skull also receives vibrations, right? There's a pressure wave and it goes through the skull. We can measure how well the skull transmits vibrations to the cochlea and how well the cochlea vibrates. If the cochlea is not vibrating very well and responding to the vibrations of the stapes, which was the case of my ear, this is not a good procedure. It doesn't fix it. It's be like putting a needle on a record that's bare. Because the vibrations are not getting down to the basilar membrane in sufficient fashion. Because the cochlea itself has to resonate, has to receive that vibration, and that vibration and the stiffness of the cochlea, the bone around the cochlea, impacts how well the cochlea vibrates. That's why, like these horns, the material used for the horns impact the sound of a phonograph, do they not? I've been here 10 years. I'm starting to figure out what's a good horn and what's a bad one. It's not looks. That's clearly the case. So what do they do in my case? So if we slip to the next slide, this is really in medicine one of the greatest triumphs. We do a cochlear implant. The nerve fibers of the auditory nerve, of which there's 3,500 connections, are receiving electrical impulses from that mechanical ear. So let's just bypass all of the mechanical aspects of the ear and send inside the ear, inside the cochlea, an electrode array. So here you see it's been inserted into the cochlea and it spins around. You stick that array in there and you cut into the back of the skull and you stick that, you find the cochlea, drill a hole in the cochlea and you shove that array in there. And then you put this processor, this receiver, the stimulator up underneath the skin of the skull, on top of the skull. And then at your leisure, you attach a transmitter to it. And that's this thing. So this is the latest. They used to have backpacks that did this. So I put this on that apparatus. This processor picks up sound and it converts it to an electrical signal, which gets transmitted down this array, and depending on the frequency of the sound, stimulates electronically either one or more of these arrays. And of course, that stimulation is picked up by the auditory nerve, and it's perceived as signal. This array might have, I think mine has 18 components. Now I want you to think about it. 18 components trying to translate differently to 3,500 receptors doesn't work. It does. And the way it sounds, if you flip to the next slide, you can't go on the web and listen to how a cochlear implant sounds because you can't get into anyone's brain who has one. Kind of sounds like, I would describe it initially, these tin cans, when we used to create the tin can. And it distorts the vibrations. You don't pick up as good a frequency and people sound kind of weird. Here's the amazing thing. The way you learn to hear out of a cochlear implant is through practice. So you have words read to you, you look at 4 or 5 words and you try to figure out which word it is. And because you don't have the frequency division in sound, words like gnat and bat sound very similar. Long words like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, easy to perceive because you just need a little bit of that variation in the sound to get a sound. That's the analogous to a record. Those records those 78s that Tyler showed are cut. They aren't cut with the precision of the actual variation in the sound waves produced by Ethel Merman and Johnny Green. They're an approximation, and they have that needle vibrate, right? And through the apparatus of the phonographs produces an approximation of what that pressure wave was when it was live. And this cochlear implant, previous slide, is producing an approximation of the stimulation that my ear would get from a well-functioning apparatus, with 18 electrodes stimulating 3,500 different hair cells. And it's remarkable that it works. It does work. It's improved my hearing dramatically. So the human ear is very much like the phonograph and works almost identically in terms of the mechanical translation of these vibrations. Yeah, yes. Yeah.
We hear that visually impaired people's hearing it seems to improve. And is that because the brain can be reprogrammed partly to hear things? Like you said, you had a bit programmed to hear words.
Yeah, yes.
It's a programming process that the brain is able to do. And the acuity can increase.
That's correct. What the brain learns to do with sound is learned. So what you have to do with a cochlear implant is practice hearing sounds and seeing them written. So we do a lot of audiobooks and reading and a lot of words and reading. And you're retraining the brain to hear as it did before with a different set of impulses. A coarser set of impulses, right? Because there's only 18 arrays instead of 30. I can tell you, spending the time in learning to hear has been very stimulating to the brain. So where they say we should learn a new language or learn music as we grow older, it stimulates the brain in some ways I've never ever had before. And it is a sort of fountain of youth, believe it or not. Because the brain is woken up, it has to reprogram itself. And after about a year, things sound pretty much as they did before, so I'm told. Tyler has always sounded like Tyler from the moment I've had the cochlear implant. My other son, Harris, and so forth. I can't hear my wife. The pressure waves that my wife produces are muted. M has the same amplitude as Z or Z, and it doesn't. So speech is intelligible because we get great changes in frequency and amplitude as we speak words. And when you don't have a lot of variation in amplitude as you speak different words, it's not as perceptible. Interesting. Anyway, so I've learned in short order a lot about phonographs just by thinking about the connection between the ear and phonographs. And Tyler he's known this for a long, long time. He probably didn't realize he knew that much about the human ear, but they are one and the same to a point. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, for sure.
Thank you, Greg. Tyler, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yep.
How do I get one of those?
Any other questions for them before we? Any other questions? No? We have a question over here. Oh, you have a question.
On this too, the diaphragms. When you look at the mic we produce, we know that it works with acoustic record very well, but we have some of these switched over to the Kodak records. Am I right to assume that the aluminum, the reproducer with the aluminum diaphragm would make that record sound better?
Yeah, it picks up higher frequencies. The aluminum, I believe, picks up higher frequencies.
All right.
If you want a good diaphragm, just dig up somebody and take their eardrum. Now, that's what Bell did, right? But even here,
I would totally do
think
that.
about our diaphragm and how good it is, right? It's very supple, very responsive.
Excellent, very good. Yep, thank you so much. Okay, so break time. So, and then, yep.
And then we'll have a quick look at the auction. We'll try and broadcast the auction items so that everybody at home can see them.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Back.